Aunt Margaret's house in the quiet hills of Vermont always carried a soft echo of old stories, the kind that linger in the corners even when no one speaks of them, and when Ethan arrived to help her recover after her small surgery, he expected nothing more than calm days, warm tea, and the gentle silence of small-town life. But from the first evening, he noticed the way her eyes tightened every time she glanced toward the cellar door, as if every memory she wanted to forget lived behind that thin line of wood, and he could feel something unspoken pressing between them. She moved around the kitchen with slow care, smiling as if she wanted him to believe everything was normal, but her smile vanished whenever the floor creaked in the direction of the cellar stairs. Ethan asked about it once casually, but she avoided the question with a soft laugh that didn't feel real, turning the topic toward groceries, whether anything that didn't require opening that door. Still, the house had a way of holding its breath around that spot, and by his second night, when the sky outside turned dark blue and heavy rain tapped the windows, the air inside felt different, thicker, like it was waiting for someone to notice something. When the lights flickered for just a moment, Ethan saw Aunt Margaret stiffen as if she expected someone, or something, to climb up those old wooden steps. She tried to hide it, but her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her mug. Later, when the wind picked up outside and the silence inside the house stretched too far, she finally spoke the truth she had been holding back, her voice cracked and low, almost apologetic. "Please don't go down there alone, Ethan. I can't bear what I might hear." It wasn't fear of danger that colored her tone. It was the kind of fear born from old emotions, from memories she had kept sealed away for years, the kind people are afraid to touch because they hurt too deeply. Ethan promised he wouldn't go because that was what she needed, but something in her eyes told him she didn't fully trust that promise, not because she doubted him, but because she knew curiosity has a way of tugging at people when a mystery grows too loud. That night, long after Aunt Margaret had gone to bed, the house fell into a stillness so complete that Ethan could hear the rain whispering against the roof and the soft ticking of the old clock in the hallway. He wasn't thinking about the cellar at first. He was reading on the couch, trying to enjoy the quiet. But then, a sound rose from beneath the floorboards. Not a crash, not a thud, nothing frightening. Instead, it sounded like paper moving, like someone gently turning pages of a book in the dark. The sound was soft but clear, and it didn't belong in a cellar filled with old tools and storage boxes. Ethan froze, wondering if he imagined it, but there it was again, faint and rhythmic, like someone reading slowly, thoughtfully. His heart began to beat a little faster, not with fear, but with a strange curiosity he couldn't explain. The cellar door stood only a few steps away from him, looking entirely ordinary, but suddenly it felt like the center of the house, like the quiet pulse beneath everything. Ethan told himself that maybe the wind slipped through a crack, maybe a box shifted, maybe anything logical, but none of those things sounded like someone turning pages. He stood slowly, each breath growing heavier as he moved closer to the door, and for a moment he hesitated, remembering his promise to Aunt Margaret. But promises made before a mystery reveals itself always feel more fragile than they should, and the sound continued, soft and steady, pulling him forward. His hand reached for the doorknob almost on its own, and the cold metal surprised him, as if the cellar held a different temperature from the rest of the house. He took a breath, one deep enough to steady him, then opened the door. The stairs waited below, swallowed in dim shadows, and the faint glow of a small light flickered at the bottom, something that hadn't been on earlier. The air drifting up felt cool and strangely calm, almost inviting. Ethan stepped down one creaking stair, then another, the sound of turning pages guiding him deeper. He didn't know what he expected to find. Maybe nothing at all, maybe only old memories buried in dust, but the one thing he never imagined was that he would see someone down there. And yet, as he reached the last stair, blinking at the gentle lamplight, he realized the cellar wasn't empty. A silhouette sat at a wooden table, surrounded by old boxes and the warm glow of a small lamp. Ethan's breath caught, not in fear but in shock, because the person sitting in the shadows wasn't a stranger. It was someone he once knew, someone he never thought he'd see again. And at that moment everything he thought he understood about Aunt Margaret's fear, the cellar, and his own past began to shift in ways he wasn't ready for. He didn't expect to see what or who was waiting for him down there. Ethan stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, his breath catching as the faint lamplight revealed the woman sitting at the old wooden table, her back slightly hunched as she sorted through a stack of papers, And when she lifted her head, the sight hit him harder than he was ready for. Lily, the girl who had once been his closest friend, the girl who lived next door when they were teenagers, the girl whose laughter had filled every summer evening until life pulled them apart. And the shock of seeing her in that quiet cellar felt like bumping into a memory he never stopped missing. She blinked at him, startled, then gave a soft, almost shy smile that carried years of history in its curve. "Ethan? I didn't expect anyone down here," she said, brushing dust from her sleeve as though embarrassed to be caught in such a forgotten corner of the house. She explained quickly, almost too quickly, that Aunt Margaret had allowed her to store some of her art supplies in the cellar because her small apartment didn't have enough room, and she'd come by earlier to organize them but got lost in old sketchbooks and forgotten canvases. Ethan nodded, trying to understand how someone from his past had quietly returned to the edges of his life without him knowing. And the moment felt heavy with something unsaid, something that tugged at the air between them. Lily looked different, older in a graceful way. Her hair pulled into a loose knot, paint marks on her sleeves, and a softness in her eyes that felt both familiar and new. The years had changed both of them, but the connection between them still hummed quietly, like a song they once knew by heart. Before Ethan could speak, a sudden sound from upstairs made them both look up, slow, careful footsteps crossing the old wood floors, the kind that announced someone carrying both worry and hesitation. Aunt Margaret's voice drifted down the stairs, calling his name with a tremor that didn't match her usual calm, and Ethan could feel the tension settling into the room as she descended the steps. When she reached the bottom and saw Lily, a wave of emotion passed across her face. Surprise, relief, sadness, and something gentler than all of them. She whispered, "You came back." Not accusing, not fearful, but in a way that suggested Lily's presence touched a part of her heart she rarely opened. Lily stood slowly, her hands softly clasped, and answered with a quiet honesty that carried its own weight. "I didn't think I would." Ethan watched them, sensing there was a story threaded between the two women, something deeper than a simple visit to store old supplies. Aunt Margaret stepped closer to the old trunk near the wall, her fingers tracing the worn wood as if gathering the courage to revisit something she had avoided for years. And Ethan realized the fear she had of the cellar wasn't about ghosts or darkness, but about the memories she had kept sealed beneath the house. She lifted the trunk's lid with a slow, careful motion, revealing letters, photographs, and pieces of artwork that looked untouched by time. And Lily's expression softened in a way that showed recognition. "These are my mom's," she whispered, her voice catching slightly. Aunt Margaret nodded, eyes misty, explaining that she had kept everything because she didn't know how to let go, not after losing her closest friend, and she had been afraid to face Lily after the loss, afraid of breaking down, afraid of saying the wrong thing when grief wrapped itself around both of them. The air shifted then, becoming warmer, filled with a tender ache that wasn't painful but full of remembrance, forgiveness, and something healing. Ethan watched Lily kneel beside the trunk, her hands trembling as she lifted a small sketchbook filled with her mother's drawings, and he saw how much strength it took for her to face pieces of her past she had avoided too. Aunt Margaret rested a gentle hand on her shoulder, not saying anything more, just being there. And for the first time since arriving, Ethan understood why she feared the cellar. It wasn't the place but what it held. As the two women shared the quiet moment, Ethan felt something change between himself and Lily too. She looked at him with a softness that sparked something long buried inside him, something he thought he'd grown out of. The unspoken feelings they once danced around seemed to rise again. Not loudly but steady and undeniable. But before Ethan could speak, a thin envelope slipped from the side of the trunk and fluttered onto the floor near his feet. He picked it up without thinking, turning it over in his hand, and his breath caught when he saw his name written on the front, written in Lily's handwriting. The room fell still for a moment, as if time had paused, waiting for him to understand what he was holding. Lily's face flushed a soft pink, her breath catching as she realized what he had found, and she stood slowly, almost nervously, as if preparing for a truth she never expected to surface. "I wrote that years ago," she said quietly, her voice trembling in a way Ethan had never heard before. Aunt Margaret stepped back gently, giving them space without making a sound, as if she knew this moment belonged to them alone. Lily continued, explaining that she had written the letter the night before Ethan left for college, wanting to tell him everything she felt, everything she never found the courage to say. But then life spiraled unexpectedly. Her mother passed away, Her world fell apart, and she couldn't bring herself to hand over a letter filled with feelings when everything around her felt so fragile. She thought sending it later wouldn't make sense, so she tucked it away, thinking time would help her forget, but instead it buried itself deeper in her heart. Ethan held the letter like something delicate, something that carried the weight of a life he might have lived if words had been spoken earlier. His heart pounded, not with regret, but with a strange mix of warmth and surprise, because the longing he once had for her, the quiet affection he had tried to outgrow, suddenly didn't feel like something that belonged to the past. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the girl he once cared for and the woman she had become, both standing in front of him with a vulnerability that made his chest ache. The cellar, once a place of avoided memories, now held a moment he never expected. And as he stood there, the soft light brushing across their faces, he realized that what he found in that cellar wasn't something strange or frightening. It was the beginning of something he didn't know he still needed. Aunt Margaret stood at the bottom of the cellar stairs with a quiet heaviness in her posture, as if seeing Lily again unlocked memories she had kept sealed for years, and for a moment no one spoke, the stillness wrapping around them like the cellar itself was holding its breath. Then she stepped closer, her voice soft and trembling, and said she wasn't afraid of the cellar because of darkness or strange noises, but because the space was filled with pieces of a life she had loved and lost, pieces she had never learned how to face without feeling like her heart might break all over again. Lily looked at her with gentle eyes, and Ethan could see the sadness flicker across her face as she knelt near the open trunk and traced her fingers over the old sketchbooks and letters her mother had left behind, each item carrying a small part of her life before it all changed, and the air felt warm with the kind of emotions people try to bury but never truly forget. Aunt Margaret swallowed hard and said she kept the trunk locked away not because she wanted to hide the memories, but because she didn't know how to share them without reopening wounds she was afraid of touching, especially after Lily's mother passed so suddenly, leaving both of them lost in their own grief. Lily listened quietly, tears gathering in her eyes though she tried to blink them away, and she thanked Margaret in a shaking voice for keeping everything safe, for not letting her mother's art and letters get lost in time, and that simple thank you seemed to crack something inside Margaret, who finally let her shoulders fall as though she had been carrying too much weight for too long. Ethan watched the moment unfold, feeling as if he was witnessing something private and delicate, two people trying to rebuild a connection shaped by years of silence, fear, and love they never stopped feeling. And it made him see his aunt in a way he hadn't before, not as the strong, steady woman who always had a plan, but as someone with her own quiet heartbreaks she had never let anyone see. The three of them stood together, surrounded by the dim glow of the cellar lamp and the dust of old memories, and the space no longer felt cold or eerie but full of something painfully human. As Lily wiped her eyes and closed the trunk gently, Ethan felt his chest tighten, not just because of the emotional weight in the room but because the feelings he once had for her, the affection he thought belonged only to the past, were suddenly waking up inside him like a spark touched by air. He didn't want to let the moment slip away, but just as he was searching for something meaningful to say, something that wouldn't sound foolish or too raw, the soft scrape of paper caught his attention. A small envelope had fallen from between the pages of an old sketchbook, drifting onto the floor like it had been waiting for this exact moment to reveal itself. Ethan bent down and picked it up, and when he turned it over, he felt his breath hitch. His name was written on it in Lily's handwriting, the ink faded but still unmistakable. He looked at her, and she looked back with a kind of startled vulnerability, her cheeks flushing as she realized what he was holding. She stepped forward slowly and admitted in a quiet, trembling voice that she had written the letter years earlier, on the night before he left for college, but she had never given it to him because life fell apart too quickly, and she didn't know how to say goodbye to someone she cared for when she was drowning in grief. Aunt Margaret stepped back, giving them space without a word, understanding instinctively that some moments belonged only to the heart and not to witnesses. Lily explained that she wrote down everything she never said aloud, the feelings she kept hidden, the affection she never gave shape to, and she had planned to leave the letter on his doorstep. But when her mother's health declined and everything became overwhelming, she tucked it away, thinking it was too late to say any of it once life pulled them in different directions. Ethan felt his heart beat faster as he held the envelope, the weight of the unsent words pressing into his palm like a future that could have been, and emotions he hadn't let himself feel in years began rising again with a force he didn't expect. He realized then that the cellar wasn't just a room filled with memories for Aunt Margaret and Lily. It was also a place holding pieces of his own past he didn't know were still alive. Lily looked at him with fear and hope tangled together, as if she wasn't sure whether opening that letter after so many years would lead to healing or heartbreak, and Ethan didn't know what to say. But he knew he didn't want her to walk away again without understanding how much she once meant to him. The lamp flickered softly, casting warm light across her face, and he saw the same Lily he used to know, the one who painted on old fences, laughed too loudly, dreamed too big, and once looked at him like he was part of a future that never happened. The room felt full of memories of lost time, of second chances that had somehow found their way back after years of silence. And Ethan realized that the cellar had held more than just old boxes. It had held the truth that everyone had been afraid to face. The air stirred gently, carrying the scent of dust and old paper, and in that quiet space something broke open, not painfully, but like the soft release of a held breath. Ethan didn't open the letter yet. Instead, he met Lily's eyes and let the weight of everything between them rest there for a moment, knowing that whatever came next would change something for all of them. And as the cellar seemed to settle around them, no longer heavy with fear but with understanding, Ethan realized this wasn't an ending or a memory. It was the beginning of something none of them had expected when the night began. Ethan stood in the warm glow of the cellar lamp holding the letter Lily had written years ago, and the weight of it felt heavier than paper, like it carried a version of his life he never lived, and while he didn't open it yet, he could feel every unspoken word pressing softly against his chest. Lily watched him with a nervous kind of courage, her breath uneven, her fingers twisting together as if she was afraid of what he might think but even more afraid of turning away from this moment after years of silence. And the emotions in her eyes were so raw that Ethan felt a quiet ache rising inside him. Aunt Margaret, sensing the tenderness between them, stepped carefully toward the stairs and whispered something gentle about giving them space, then climbed up slowly, her footsteps fading until the cellar felt like its own small world wrapped in dust, old memories, and a fragile hope that had somehow survived everything life had thrown at all three of them. Ethan turned the envelope over in his hands again, his heart pounding fast but steady, and Lily took a small step closer as if pulled toward the truth she had avoided for years. She explained in a soft, trembling voice that she had poured her feelings into the letter because she thought he deserved to know the truth before leaving for college, but fear held her back, then grief swallowed her courage, and by the time she felt strong enough to face anything again, he was already gone and she convinced herself he had moved on, that the timing had passed them by. Ethan felt something inside him shift, not painfully but like a door opening to a room he had forgotten existed, and he finally spoke, telling her that he had cared for her too, more deeply than he ever said. But he was young and afraid and unsure whether she saw him as anything more than a friend, and when he left for college without knowing, he felt he was walking away from something unfinished but didn't know how to fix it. Lily let out a shaky breath, her eyes glistening, and she whispered that she never stopped thinking about him, even when life pushed her forward and she tried to build something new, because he had always been the person she wished she had been brave enough to choose. The cellar felt warm and still, the dust floating like tiny sparks in the soft light, and Ethan finally slid his thumb under the flap of the envelope, opening the letter slowly, carefully, as if touching a part of time that still lived inside both of them. The paper unfolded easily, the handwriting small and familiar, and though he didn't read every word aloud, the meaning washed over him with simple clarity. She had loved him gently and honestly, and she had hoped he might feel the same. When he looked up, Lily's eyes were full of fear and longing, and Ethan felt everything inside him straighten into certainty. He stepped closer, stopping just inches away from her, not touching, not rushing, but letting her see the truth in his expression. He told her he wished he had read the letter years ago because it would have changed everything, and she whispered, barely breathing, "Would it really have changed anything?" He nodded slowly and said yes, it would have changed the choices he made, the distance he kept, and the way he left without telling her how much he cared, because feelings like the ones he once had for her didn't disappear. They simply waited for a moment when the heart was brave enough to speak. Her breath caught, her eyes softening, and she admitted she had been afraid he would open the letter and feel nothing, afraid the past meant more to her than it ever meant to him. But his voice was gentle and full of warmth as he told her that the past still mattered because she mattered, then and now. The cellar no longer felt like a place of forgotten things. It felt like the beginning of something tender and real, something they had both been too scared to reach for before. Lily's posture relaxed just a little, as if she finally allowed herself to hope, and Ethan felt a warmth move through him as he said he didn't want to lose the chance to see what they could be. Not again. Not after life had just handed them a second chance neither of them expected. Lily stepped even closer, her voice barely more than a whisper as she said she never stopped caring, not truly, and his chest tightened with something soft and beautiful. They didn't touch. There was no sudden dramatic moment. Just a quiet closeness that felt more intimate than anything else. A closeness built on years of silence now finally breaking open into something honest. Aunt Margaret's voice floated gently down the stairs, calling out to check if everything was all right, and Lily smiled just a little through the emotion, wiping her eyes as Ethan tucked the letter carefully into his jacket, as if protecting something precious. When they climbed the stairs together, the air upstairs felt different, warmer, lighter, like a house that had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Margaret saw their faces and understood instantly, offering a small smile filled with relief, love, and the quiet pride of someone who had hoped for this without daring to expect it. The night settled softly around them, and as Lily slipped on her coat to head home, Ethan walked her to the front door, their shoulders brushing in a way that felt natural and new at the same time. She paused before leaving, looking up at him with the same gentle courage she used to have when they were younger, and she whispered that she wasn't ready for this moment to end. Ethan smiled, the kind of smile that came from deep inside, and told her it didn't have to. She left with a soft promise to see him tomorrow, and when the door closed, Ethan stood there for a moment, the letter warm against his chest, feeling like life had quietly handed him something he didn't know he had been missing. The cellar no longer felt like a place of fear or hidden memories. It felt like the place where everything finally began again. Not with drama or sudden declarations, but with honesty, hope, and a love that never truly faded, only waited for the right moment to rise again.